Pest control is probably one of the most underrated acquisitions you could possibly make, especially if you're building, a roll up or just trying to buy cash flow and service based businesses as well. Because when you're looking for an acquisition, three of the things that you're looking for, one is going to be something that has essential demand, also something that has predictable cash flow, and something that also has clear levers to scale. And pest control has all three of these things. Pest control isn't optional. If, for instance, if your boiler was to break, you may delay fixing it, or if your kitchen needs repainting, then you may be able to procrastinate and not get it done straight away. But if you have rats in a restaurant, or I don't know, bed bugs in a rental property, or even cockroaches in a food warehouse, you can't really wait until next month. You have no choice but to solve it pretty much now. And that urgency is what makes pest control recession resistant, because regardless of the economy and the macro environment that we're in, demand for these things, it doesn't just disappear. The problem's not just going to disappear, it has to get solved. Okay. And when it comes to commercial clients, it's even stronger, because food businesses, hospitality, housing associations, councils, warehouses, all of these are required to have pest management in place. So you're not really selling a nice to have, you're selling risk removal. Secondly, pest control has naturally high margins, and the reason for this is because your core cost base is mostly technician time, fuel, to travel back and forth different jobs, and the materials themselves, are relatively cheap. You're not reselling any expensive stock. You're not having to carry huge amounts of inventory, and you're not having to do any, heavy construction where, the labor bloats out. So once the van's on the road, the teams are in place, every additional job is just high contribution margin work. And it's also, pricing's fairly elastic as well, because, customers, they don't shop pest control the way they would shop garden landscaping. They're paying to avoid damage, fines, closures, or any reputational disasters as well. Like a well-run operator with good route density and good contract mix can produce some seriously strong EBITDA margins compared with most local service-based businesses. And then I guess the third thing to consider is the best pest control businesses are just contract machines. Most people think that pest control is just one-off call outs, but the real value in pest control is in the service agreements themselves. And the commercial contracts typically run between 12 and 36 months. And then you have routine inspections, you have in monitoring just in general, and residential clients will often move to annual prevention plans. Speaking with some of the people I know that operate in the space, that's what typically happens as well. So instead of fighting for random jobs every week, you're actually building a base of predictable monthly cash flow, which means smoother seasonality, easier forecasting, and a business that actually supports leverage in acquisition too, because banks like it, buyers like it. And you also get to sleep better, right? Because, revenue is already booked in for next month, and is nice and predictable as well. And then if we look at the UK pest control market itself, it's kind of fragmented. Yes, there are some big players in the market, but beneath those big players, there are just hundreds of owner-operated businesses or regional firms with strong customer books, but a lot of them do have pretty weak systems. I've spent some time on discovery calls with some of the people that I work with, and a lot of these do have pretty weak systems. Processes aren't great, but look, fragmented markets are where the roll-ups are born. So this is where the opportunity actually is in this sector, because you can buy small firms at fairly sensible multiples. You can centralize the admin, definitely improve the marketing when it comes to these businesses, and tighten up the scheduling as well, because I feel like that was one of the constraints that we discovered when we was going through that process as well. And just by doing a few things and moving a few cogs, you can quite quickly lift margins as well. So these are the things that makes the whole textbook consolidation plays. So, pest control's pretty prime for these consolidation plays. The wind's just blowing in your favor if you're looking in this sector. The UK's been seeing quite steady tailwinds that increase pest activity, for better or worse, with urban density, definitely more food distribution as well. There's a lot of older housing stock, and we are starting to see some warmer winters as well, which a friend of mine told me extends the breeding cycle of pests as well. So whether we like it or not, the pest pressure is definitely rising. It's not shrinking. It's not going anywhere. So you're not buying into a fading industry. You're buying into a service that's just going to become more needed over time. And look, if we take into consideration most of what we just spoken about, you can improve these businesses fast. I suppose the easiest value levers that you can pull post acquisition is probably going to be, firstly, shift the mix towards contracts so you get more of that recurring revenue. Again, makes it more predictable. Probably the route density optimization as well. So covering less drive time, but doing more jobs per day. So I feel like it's quite easy to, spread yourself a little bit too thin, and making it harder, to generate revenue on a day-to-day basis if you don't optimize your scheduling. Then I guess it's looking at pricing in general, probably tidying up the legacy book to try and lift the yield as well. Then there's going to be cross-sell services, right? There's going to be drain surveys, bird control. There's going to be things that just add to your core offering that, a lot of these companies probably aren't doing already. And I guess for those that are looking to build, to sell, and look for an exit at some point, when you're looking at pest control, it has high margins, recurring contracts, and definitely, defense demand as well. So, any strategic buyer or business buyer in general, private equity, depending on the size of the business that you're building, you do have multiple exit options there. Sell into strategic, sell into a platform, or I guess just keep bolting on for a larger exit later down the line.